Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Grid. I'm your host, Varup Karyat, and I'm very excited for the conversation today. I have David Stocks, who's had a long and distinguishable career at IBM, something I'm particularly excited about. David was the chief executive for IBM UK and Ireland. He was chief operating officer for Europe and then went on to become the general manager for the partner ecosystem across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. A lot of experience. And now David is on the board for Quant.ai. And I'm hoping to have a great conversation with him about his life experiences and what Quant is doing these days and what is Quant offering to the marketplace. David, I'm so glad to welcome you to the show.
I'm excited to be here. Good to talk to you and looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah. Maybe so start with, you've led organizations through a lot of technology transformations in your long career. How do you think about the transformation that's happening right now, the AI revolution, or people call it different names, but what is your feeling about it?
Yeah, I'm probably showing my age here a bit, Swaru, but I remember the first technology transition was when I joined IBM, frankly, where we were going through the transition from mainframe to client server. But I've seen multiple transitions we had. Obviously, the emergence of the network through the 90s, which led to the internet, then the cloud, then we had mobile, social analytics, and obviously we're now at an incredible moment. I think out of those 3 decades, I think this is the most transformative when we talk about AI, and I think specifically agentic AI. I think the reason for that is that we're in a moment where the technology is now mimicking human behavior. And I mean by that autonomous reasoning and action, which is not something we've seen in the previous technology waves. Of course, they've all been about productivity, about efficiency, ultimately also innovation with new business models. But this is the first time we've seen that real simulation in terms of human behavior. So I think while those previous waves all gave us better tools, this wave is also building digital colleagues, right? And that's
Yeah.
an incredible, that's a significantly different shift. And actually, I think we're very much still in the early phases of appreciating the full implication.
Great. That's a great perspective. I like the fact that you compare it to a colleague. It is exactly that, right? It is a colleague. It's a new kind of colleague that you're going to get. Uh, uh, so what is Quant AI focused on? If you would help the listeners understand that a little bit more.
If I can sort of make it a little bit personal in answering that question, because it's sort of why did I end up, joining the board of Quant? And I think what stood out for me was that there was a lot of AI and agentic AI pilots out there that were simply not reaching production scale. The ROI wasn't there, and our companies are burning a lot of money, frankly, going through. And the ROI, while, on paper, there's a lot of promise, wasn't being met. And I think what Quant was doing is addressing at least for the reasons for why that was. I think, first of all, it brought an architectural thought to the deployment of AI. So instead of thinking about an agent in isolation, as smart as an agent may be, it was thinking about form where agents, systems of record and systems of engagement and humans all work together around a business process. I think for me, that was addressing the real business opportunity, which is how do you transform, not just make them more productive, but how do you transform business process? I think that was the first thing. I think the second thing is just the scale of autonomous reasoning that agents brought to any application, right? So I know that's a world where potentially others will catch up and there'll be a race here, right? But I think that the heritage Quant had, which is, by the way, a relatively new company, but it goes back 25 years when Chintan first developed, what I call virtual engineers, right? We're doing the early stages of what I call AI ops around technology infrastructure, which then went on to be IP soft and so on. So I think that heritage has come to play now with the level of sophistication that the agents are bringing to their use cases that are being deployed. So I think it's that combination of having an architectural thought. Now, that thought is actually embodied in this idea of a temporal agentic operating system, which is a mouthful, I must admit. But it's really looking at, as I say, the operating system that connects humans, systems, and agents together seamlessly in a business process. But I think the other issue that I'm seeing, particularly in regulated industries, Swaroop, is that ultimately agentic systems, by design, probabilistic. There is no room in critical industries for probabilistic systems. So you need also to bring in deterministic thinking. You need to wrap around that business process, deterministic thinking. And the thing about having an operating system to do that, it allows those guardrails to be put in place. And whether we're talking about banking, or in your case, I know you're far more interested in the utility sector. Obviously, that's critical to the deployment of any agentic system.
Yeah. Just to pick on that a little bit, one of the things that people are struggling with is this ROI question, right? How do you define ROI for an agentic system? And without stronger ROI definition, it becomes difficult to move beyond pilots and scale. How is Quant addressing that?
Yeah, in a couple of ways. I think, look, each use case has to be grounded in a set of KPIs, business outcomes, right? So that's the first thing that is obvious to say, but it's amazing how many pilots are being spun up without thinking about what's the end game here, right? Now, you might have a sales application, right? So you want to qualify leads better. Well, okay. So in that case, I want to know what's my lead qualification yield from inbound leads, right? Using a qualification agent. Faster those leads being qualified. What's the quality of the lead that's been qualified? But ultimately, you want to see what's my yield, right? So you have to have a very specific ROI, KPI, and don't shy away from that. Don't try and fudge it, because there's a lot of pressure in the system to get agentic systems deployed. But if they're not achieving the KPIs that you've defined, then clearly it's going to be a fool's game, if you will, right? Chasing that. So that's the first thing. I think in any of the proof of value or MVPs, use whatever term you want, and we're very specific about the KPIs with our clients. I think the second thing is having a dashboard that manages that. So when I talk about the operating system before, that operating system embodies or that allows you to monitor on a real-time basis API performance for the agents and humans, right, within that business process. So it's being disciplined, number one, in defining the KPIs, and then having the tooling that allows you to real-time be able to measure those KPI performance.
Awesome. And also what you said about what Chetan was doing piqued my interest a little bit. If you don't mind explaining the history of Quant, how it started, how it came about doing what it's doing right now, that would be helpful in kind of anchoring our understanding too, I think.
Yeah, I'll try and give a brief history rather than, because it is well, actually now 26-year history. 27 years actually, to be precise, because it goes back to 1990. So
I was thinking
yeah,
a relatively new firm, but it looks like I was completely wrong.
and in some ways you're not wrong in that Quant has been around a few years now. So where Quant was born, but actually the heritage of Quant goes back to the original company, which is IPsoft, which built the first, as I said up front here, the first virtual engineers. So that idea of being able to automate the management of critical systems, right, or enterprise systems, any enterprise system, was really where the company was born. And then that was really the core business, right through the early 2000s, early part of this century, if you will. But then I think I might get the exact date wrong. I think it was around 2013, 2014. And that was kind of in this very early stages of this phase of AI, if you will, where they created the first sort of conversational AI tools that then front-ended the IPsoft technology. And then that built into a company called Amelia, which maybe some of your listeners have heard. Eventually, that technology was sold. IPsoft was used broadly, including, by the way, by IBM. And so you had this heritage of what I would call automation, then the early stages of conversational AI, and really they brought that engineering capability together, right, to form Quant. And the original idea around Quant was actually about digital employees, creating digital employees. And that's the concept that I described up front here. I think it's gone much further than that as the market moves quickly. What clients were really looking for is not just a factory to produce digital employees. They're actually looking at a way of how do they bring productivity, how do they bring insight into core business processes. And hence was born the whole idea of the operating system, the temporal agentic operating. And the reason it needs to be temporal is because this needs to be managed over time, right? That things happen asynchronously, particularly when you're talking about facing business processes. So having that ability to memory across a business process was incredibly important. So that was really where we are today. And, the journey continues for it, right? Because this market is moving incredibly
Yeah.
quickly. And what we're seeing is a lot of traction with clients and a number of clients in the US across utilities, banking, insurance, retail, and now starting in the travel sector. So it's an exciting time for quant. And now we're expanding business which has been built in North America into Europe. So we're excited to bring the technology here, working with IBM and others.
Got you. And we will get into utilities in a bit here. But if we were to think about what are some of the most practical, powerful use cases that Quant is, or problems that Quant is solving right now with some of your clients, it'll be good to understand that so you can put like a practical lens to it.
Yeah, and it's different by industry, of course. No mortgage originations in banking, KYC in banking, collections in utilities, management in utilities, great examples. Travel bookings in the airline sector, another good one. Anywhere where there are repeatable, scalable processes, where there's volume in an organization, where I think the business case is resonating for organizations. I think also in the retail sector, ordering, being able to do online ordering, particularly where it's complex, and an agent being able to take orders that combine different product sets and package those together. That's another area where we've had some early success. And then, in the auto sector, and I'm being a bit careful here because some of these are still under NDA,
Yeah.
as you can imagine, right? And these are very sensitive and competitive kind of deployments. But the whole idea of booking, in the car industry, right? Booking recalls, right? So if there's an issue with a car, being able to contact the clients, be able to schedule their appointment with a dealer, but even doing that with service requests, right? Following up on service requests and reminding people of services, but then being able to book it, then actually giving feedback from the service request, all being managed by an agent working with the dealer and the end user. That all coming together is streamlining that process. And particularly when you're talking about recalls, where there's clearly a regulatory effect here, that's important that that's all recorded and registered as well. So that's another interesting use case that we're seeing right now with a big auto manufacturer. So, when you say which use cases are resonating, there's some of the early ones, but we're seeing, a lot of new use cases emerge as we innovate with our clients.
Awesome. You talked about outage management. Outage management 15 years ago, 10 years ago is completely different than outage management right now, right? And there's a few reasons for that. There is obviously a lot of unpredictable load coming in, like be it EV growth. There is a lot of distributed energy resources, so that adds to the dynamics of how supply changes and load changes. There is extreme weather events a lot more right now, right? So outage management, the way you manage outages, the way you do event correlation, etc., becomes extremely different compared to what commonly utilities are used to. If I were to poke that use case a little bit, how does that approach change in your mind, and how does what Quant is doing resonate in your mind?
Yeah, I think you touched on something important. How outage management is done now has been, I think, you would know better than I, but I think it's transformed even over the last few years, right?
Yeah.
And I think what Quant is really able to do is just accelerate that process. I don't think it's necessarily transforming the process of outage management, but it's simply doing it at scale in a way that humans simply couldn't do. And we know with outage management, time matters.
Yeah.
There is clearly a prioritization needed to vulnerable individuals. And the ability to reach people with urgent speed can at times be, a life and death kind of situation. Right? I don't want to over dramatize it, but it's important. And so that scale that an agent can bring to that process is in itself transformative, even if the process doesn't change itself. from my point of view, that's really where I think the benefit is.
Got you. Now, when it comes to sensitive use cases like that, the explainability of what you did,
Mm.
the trust factor becomes extremely important, right? Any thoughts on that?
I think trust is just, it's not negotiable. So the governance that you put around any AI deployment, I mean, we're speaking more generally here rather than just about quant. I think
Yeah.
governance is a mandatory part of any deployment, and we're always thinking about that with our clients. And there are tools out there in the market that, IBM, for example, right, has been a leader in this field, that need to be put in place so that every decision that an agent takes can be explained when needed, right? But I think also, as I said to you up front, the ability to be able to put deterministic rules in place is another part of that equation, right? Make sure that whatever regulatory boundaries are in place, that the agent doesn't cross those. I think that's critical here. But equally, you need the other tooling, the governance tool, to be able to report on why a decision was taken, be able to program in policy, able to program in regulation. All of that is critical, and it's not an afterthought. It's part of the design.
Exactly. What about a debate that I have quite a bit, usually in my own mind and with others as well as who knows the industry really well is, we can get from reactive to predictive in many cases with AI.
Mm.
But the holy grail is when you get to adaptive, right? Like, for example, the electric grid, can it take actions to heal itself? Can it look ahead and recover faster than a human intervention could allow? But that needs to be balanced with, as you said, trust and reliability and all those things. How much of a human in the loop is required? How much control should an AI agent have versus a human in situations like that? What's your perspective?
Yeah, this is a tough question, and I think
I know it's not an easy question.
yeah, but let's sort of pull at that thread for a little bit here, and I think we'll see this play out the time here. I mean, I'd sort of step back just a little bit and say, look, in utilities in particular, I think that in the short term, a lot of the benefits of deployments will come from, not from the grid itself. They come from commercial and regulatory back office functions, if I will. So it's kind of maybe less exciting, but important, and where there's a lot of money being spent on human effort around, regulatory submissions,
Fair enough.
analysis, contract management, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of knowledge intensive, document heavy work going on there where AI can deliver, a step change in productivity, right, with fairly low operational risk. So come back to where human in the loop is it becomes less critical when we speak about those processes. Yeah, I understand that you said the holy grail is around the smart grid and the control of that, but that won't be where the near ROI is. But let's pull at the thread that you had started to pull at, which is the critical infrastructure. And I think clearly that's where things become exciting here. And we all know the stress on infrastructure, whether it's climate change or even geopolitical instability or cyber threats. And so I think where AI sort of comes in first of all is its ability to work with humans to manage that complexity of the grid and do it adaptively rather than reactively.
Yep.
But I would be the first to put my hand up and say that quiet management and with humans in the loop here to be able to work with AI tooling to make decisions that are ultimately, in the public's best interest, right? Because we're talking about critical infrastructure here. I think this is a tough problem, right? We have to work on. So I'm probably not going to give you or your listeners the answer here because I don't have it. I do have a view that we shouldn't shy away from this problem. I mean, we need to start working on it because the potential of the technology is there. And indeed, we're facing kind of also a skills problem going forward where the number of engineers actually available to us to manage infrastructure is going to be less and less. So we are going to have to depend on AI help us just to manage the grid. But more importantly, where the opportunities are, as I said before, is to be able to adapt rather than react grid.
Let's pivot a little bit. We touched on the problem of pilots and the ability to scale a little bit, right? So what really separates companies that are able to scale versus the ones that are still stuck in pilot? What is the differentiation there? How are some companies able to do it?
There's a few factors that need to come into play, but I mean the summary point here would be if you treat an AI, well, let's use agentic AI here, right? I think that's what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agentic AI deployment. If you treat it as a project rather than I'm building a capability that is going to be complementary to my current organization, then I think you'll fail. I don't want to be too conclusive about that, but I think largely that's where the problem lies in that people are thinking about AI as just another technology rather than this is something that is going to work alongside my employees. And therefore, I need to think about the organizational impacts and I need to think about do I have, because the beauty of AI, it can scale, I don't want to say infinitely, but certainly exponentially, right? It doesn't get tired. Yeah, it can make mistakes just as humans can make mistakes, but it will scale in a very different way to humans. So it's thinking about those two things. How does this affect the organization and the business processes that my organization interacts with today? And then how do I think about the underlying that will allow the pilot to scale? I think they're the two reasons it fails. One, architecture, and second, thinking about the organizational implications.
Yeah, you touched on a very important point about organizational implications. How does workforce transformation looks like in the context of that? When I think about it, it is a transformation that we've not seen in the past, at the scale we've not seen in the past, that impacts the entire workforce. You could probably compare it to moving away from typewriters and handwritten notes to use of computers, right? Personal computers.
Mm.
But I think it's more transformating than that. Like the change in the
Yeah.
workforce
Yeah.
and the capabilities the workforce need to build up is because the way you work is completely changing, right? What's your perspective on that? Like, are organizations getting it right?
I think some are starting to get it right and they're thinking about it from the bottom up because I think a top down approach is ultimately quite disruptive for someone whose job is being replaced, at least even in part, by an agent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And you have to think about the implications of that, right? The thing that you've built, not necessarily your career, but, your short term skills about, a lot of it's been built around the knowledge you've acquired. Well, suddenly something comes along that's got better knowledge and better ability to be able to use that knowledge than you do. So what is your role then? You become much more of an orchestrator, right? That works alongside someone who's got all the knowledge that's needed to perform whatever task that may be. And so I think that you got to think on one level sort of about the type of employee that an organization, what are the foundational skills that an employee in any organization will need going forward working with agents. And that might be, as I say, orchestration, composition, bringing things together. The idea of having judgment becomes more important because not necessarily agents do that well. So they're fundamental skills. And I think, ultimately we're just at the beginning of how do you kind of hire into that, but how do you bring those skills into the organization where largely we've been successful because we've built our careers around a set of knowledge, right? So that's the first thing I would say. I think the second thing is, when we come more specifically to pilots is certainly taking a bottom-up approach, bringing the employees with you along in those pilots and being clear on what the KPIs, come back to what we said about KPIs are, and helping them be the team that succeeds if those KPIs get delivered, rather than this is something being done to them. This is something being done with them. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, this is a new colleague that's going to be working alongside them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just happens to be a colleague that's never gets tired, has masses of scale, right? They can reach into the endless information, right? Or knowledge base to do their job.
Yeah. I mean, you think of it, every job has got to have some sort of engineering skills with it, right? Because interacting with an agent is and getting the right thing that you want out of it is also an engineering skill. People
Correct.
often
Correct.
say, "Oh, I didn't like the result that it produced. It just didn't give me the right things." But it's mostly that you did not ask the right questions, right? You do not have the right prompts to get the output that you wanted. So there is a level of I wouldn't call it prompt engineering, but there's a level of, sophisticated understanding of this new colleague that you need to form. And that's where I think organizations are or people are struggling a little bit right now.
Yeah, look, I think you said something that we shouldn't just let slip by. I think when we're in a world where we can get the answer to anything at any time,
Yeah,
what matters is asking the right question.
exactly.
Right now,
Exactly.
to ask the right questions, you still need to have context. You still need to have an element of judgment. I doesn't get it right every time or first time.
Yeah.
So, how do you iterate with technology to get the best outcome? How do you think about business process in a way that what's best done by an agent, what's best done by a human? And some of that again requires context and understanding of the regulatory environment. It also an area of human judgment where there's human interactions that are important that an agent shouldn't manage. I won't get into specific situations here, but where a human touch is required. And I think finally, and I think this is so important for any organization, is that do we make sure that ultimately AI and the organization enabled by AI with integrity? I think it's probably fair to say AI lacks a moral compass, right?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%.
And so, kind of ethical judgment, human integrity. I have the saying that I'm also working just recently with a school that I'm very proud to be part of, and kind of made a comment that said, "Look, in a world where all of the knowledge in the world is there on your desk, on your phone, right? How do we make sure that everybody has the right wisdom? Because that doesn't exist in your phone, and we should never confuse the two."
I cannot agree more. That's absolutely right. So if you were to give one piece of advice to SE
Yeah.
about this AI revolution and what they should be focusing on, what would that be?
Wait for certainty before acting. I mean, everything I've said about the care that's required, certainly when we talk about critical infrastructure, still applies. But I think those that are starting to pull ahead here are not those sort of developing strategy paper after strategy paper and making consulting reports and so on. They're actually picking maybe one or two, medium complexity, not necessarily high complexity, but medium complexity, but high volume business processes within the organization, getting employees bought in, and then applying agentic AI and giving visibility to those KPIs. Come back to what we said earlier, Swaroop, right? Giving that KPI visibility and making sure that that's not just being communicated amongst the exco and the board, but also to senior management, but across the organization, because there's no hiding. Everybody knows there's a huge technology transformation happening, not just in business, but in the world. So I think organizations need to be transparent about where they're using it, how they're using it, and the early results they're getting. And the competitive advantage ultimately will go to those who learn in real time rather than those that wait for perfection.
Awesome. Thank you. What are you most excited about personally about this?
I think the ability to make a difference. And that simply goes back to my time at IBM. I've been incredibly privileged to be part of several technology transformations where been able to see firsthand how this has ultimately led, yes, to maybe it sounds boring, right? But, business efficiencies, but ultimately how it's impacted and made for a better world. And the ability to be able to do that again in this era when we're talking about technology that I believe is way more transformative than any of the other previous cycles we've been through. It's just a massive privilege, and that excites me a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And in some sense, what your answer demonstrates is we humans are still humans, right? The answer that you said, the ability to make a difference, is the same answer you would have told me 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
Yes,
The
exactly.
instruments that's changing, right? The instruments which make a difference is changing. The scale that we can impact things is changing, but the driver and the passion is still the same. So I wonder whether an AI agent will actually get that spirit, right? Is there a thinking, feeling AI in the future who is passionate about making a difference? That's a question for the future.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. There'll be people looking at that, but I sense that whichever technology transfer, this is another technology transformation, right? So whichever one comes along, and it's always been the case, there's still a place for humans with integrity and judgment to make a difference. That technology gets deployed for a better world.
Yeah, I think people who are worried about jobs getting lost, getting replaced, etc. There is, yeah, there is a potential for things of that sort. But what I am most excited about is it's just enhancing and augmenting a human's capability, right? I don't look at it as necessarily a replacement. It's just superpowering humans. It's superpowering you in your job to make a wider, broader impact, doing things faster, etc., etc. That's my perspective, at least. We've lived through this transformation before. When we all went from, well, I was not part of that, but from using typewriters and papers, handwritten notes, was it a point where people started losing a lot of jobs, or did the workforce get transformed to do more productive, faster things, right? That's a fundamental question. I think that's the way we need to approach it. It's a new
Yeah.
capability. It's a new opportunity to enhance yourself. So why don't we?
I was just searching for a quote here, or this might be a nice place to end. It's actually by, I saw it recently, and it's by a gentleman I didn't know a lot about before I saw this quote, but it's Bernard Baruch, who
Mhm.
was actually a financier and I guess a statesman in the early part of the 20th century, right, from the US. And actually, it's interesting when I think he died in 1965, right? Because that's the first thing you need to know, how, when he lived. But he said the following, and I think it's so true now. During my 87 years, I've witnessed a whole succession of technological revolutions, but none of them has done away with the need for character in the individual or the ability to think. That is as true today as when he said that in 1965.
100%. I've not heard about this quote. I've not heard about this person. And thanks. I have to look it up. That is a very profound quote.
Yeah, that's probably a good place for us to leave it, Swerve.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I do not disagree. Anyways, David, thanks for a great conversation. Thanks for coming in. All the best with what you're doing and with Quant. And I hope to have you sometime in the future to see what exciting things have you and Quant accomplished from now until then.
I'm very excited. Look forward to that. It'd be my pleasure. Yeah.
You have a good evening, David.
Yeah. Same to you. Thanks. And thanks, everyone.
Bye.